starting with our Unit 8 is going to be memory, so let's jump right into it. Memory, in its simplest form, is the persistence of learning over time through storage and retrieval of information. David Myers tells the stories of, at age 92, his father suffered a small stroke but had one peculiar effect, and his personality was intact. He was as mobile as before. He knew us, or he knew his family, and while he was poring over family photo albums, he could reminisce in most detail about his past, but he had lost most of his ability to lay down new memories of conversations and everyday episodes. So, like, he couldn't tell Mr. Myers what day of the week it was. On the other hand, or other extreme, there are people who could be medal winners in a memory Olympics. There's a Russian journalist, and I can't say his name, so I'm just going to call him S. And all he had to do was listen while other reporters scribbled notes. You and I could probably repeat a string of about 7, maybe 9 digits, and S could repeat up to 70, provided they were read about 3 seconds apart in an otherwise silent room. And he could recall digits or words backward as easily as forward. So that is amazing, but we all have a pretty staggering capacity for remembering countless voices, sounds, songs, tastes, smells, textures, faces, places, happenings, etc., etc. So our memory is pretty incredible. But how does it work? In some ways, our memory is like a computer's information processing system. Information must first be encoded, then stored, and then it's retrieved. And encoding is a process of information into the memory processing of information into the memory systems. I'm sorry, I can't talk today. Storage is the retention of encoded information over time, and retrieval is the process of getting information out of our memory storage so we can actually use it. The Atkinson-Shiffrin 3-stage processing model states that we first record to be remembered information as a fleeting sensory memory, from which it is processed into a short-term memory, where we then encode it through rehearsal for long-term memory. And then later we use it for retrieval. This model is limited and fallible because sometimes we bypass those first 2 stages and we process some information automatically and directly into long-term memory without even being consciously aware of it. So again, we use a modified version of this 3-stage processing model. Working memory is a newer and better understanding of short-term memory because it emphasizes a more active role in the second processing stage in which information is rehearsed, new stimuli are associated with existing memories, and problems are solved. The working memory model includes the processing of incoming visual, spatial, and auditory information. So here's our modified 3-stage processing model. Again, the Atkinson-Shiffrin's classic 3-step model helps us to think about how memories are processed, but today's researchers recognize other ways long-term memories form. For example, some information slips into long-term memory via a back door without our consciously attending to it. And so much active processing occurs in the short-term memory stage that many now prefer the term working memory. And oftentimes people will confuse short-term memory and casual conversation, believing that things they remember for days or weeks and then forget are only stored in your short-term memory. But this is mistaken. True short-term memory only lasts about a memory or so. Memories that stay with you for longer than that, but not permanently, are stored in your working memory. And I encourage you to read through this graphic. I'm not going to insult your intelligence and read it for you. So, unlike most computers which do step-by-step serial processing, our brain engages in what we call parallel processing. And as a result, some encoding occurs automatically. With little or no effort, we process an enormous amount of information about space, time, frequency, and well-learned information. For example, we could recreate a sequence of the day's events in order to guess where we might have left your keys. Automatic processing occurs without our awareness and without interfering with our thinking about other things. Some forms of processing, like learning to read or drive, require attention and full effort when we first perform them, but with practice, they become automatic. And take a look at this poem. Most of you won't immediately notice the repeated word "the" in the poem. The poem actually says spring is the most beautiful time of the year. And this demonstrates our limits of automatic processing. Automatic processing occurs unconsciously. Effortful processing, however, requires attention and effort. For example, our memory of names will disappear unless we rehearse them. And rehearsal is simply the conscious repetition of information. The Ebbinghaus curve simply says, this Ebbinghaus is this guy right here, and it simply says that the amount that we remember depends on the time we learned it. And additional learning increases retention. And he says to rehearse even after you know something. So, automatic processing, where you ate dinner yesterday, you can remember that. But effortful processing is going to require your effort and attention. For example, if you want to learn this unit's concepts. So again, the Ebbinghaus curve is the amount remembered depends on the time learned. Additional learning increases retention, and rehearse even after you know it. The spacing effect is our tendency to retain information more easily if we distribute our rehearsal than if we practice in one long session. More than 300 experiments over the last century consistently reveal the benefits of spacing learning times. Massed practice, or cramming, can produce speedy short-term learning and feelings of competence, but distributed study time produces better long-term recall, and after studying long enough to master the material, further study at that time becomes inefficient. So it's better to spend that extra reviewing time later, a day later if you need to remember something 10 days, or a month later if you need to remember something 6 months. In a 9-year experiment, this guy, Harry Bayrick, and 3 of his family members practiced foreign language word translation for a given number of times at intervals ranging from 14 to 56 days. And their consistent finding was that the longer the space between the practice sessions, the better their retention up to 5 years later. And the practical implication of that is that spreading out learning over a semester or a year, or rather than over a shorter term, can help you not only on comprehensive final exams, but also in retaining the information for a lifetime. Repeated quizzing of previously studied material also helps, and this is a phenomenon that psychologists call the testing effect. And they say that testing is a powerful means of improving learning, not just assessing it. So the biggest point to remember is that spaced study and self-assessment beat cramming. The serial position effect is our tendency to remember the last and first items in a long list. So for example, a grocery list. You remember what was the first thing on the grocery list and what was the last thing on the grocery list better than you remember the middle items on the list. Immediately after learning, we remember the last items best, and that's called the recency effect. After a delay, we remember the first items best, and this is called the primacy effect. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Thanks, guys.